Well, I went to grad school later, and I remember one of the people in our class, like, all you millennials. And I was like, no, 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 not me.
Yep.
I'm like, I'm Gen X. Don't be calling me.
Welcome to Talk with History. I'm your host, Scott, here with my wife and historian, Jen.
Hello.
On this podcast, we give you insights to our history-inspired world travels, YouTube channel journey, and examine history through deeper conversations with the curious, the explorers, and the history lovers out there. We are chatting today with Matt Beat from the Mr. Beat YouTube channel. Welcome, Matt.
Oh, well, thank you for having me on your show.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Happy to have you. Now, before we get into our conversation and before any of our listeners or watchers on the video version start emptying your glasses, I want to ask those watching or listening to help us out by leaving us a review in Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or feel free to reach out to us at thehistorybuzz.com. And don't forget to check out our other podcast, Talk with History, where Jen and I dive deeper into our Walk with History videos and give you a behind-the-scenes look at our history-based YouTube journey. Now, our guest today is Matt Beat from the Mr. Beat YouTube channel. And as of recording, his channel has just over 500,000 subscribers and over 100 million channel views. Pretty cool numbers right there. But don't let his engaging and humor-filled history videos fool you into thinking that those are easy milestones to hit. His channel started way back in 2009, and so we have someone here who's been doing this for quite a while. So, Matt, I'm so happy to have you here on the History Buzz today. How you doing?
I'm a little sweaty, but doing great. I was just telling you all off air, I just got done mowing the lawn, so I apologize for the... Well, you can't smell me at least, so that's good.
There we go. And that's the reality of the life that we live as people who work full time, but also do things like YouTube and podcasts and things like that. So, Matt, can you tell us and our listeners a little bit about yourself, maybe where you grew up and kind of how you came to be so passionate about history?
Yeah. Well, how I came to be so passionate about history is kind of probably unorthodox. Like, I wasn't really raised in a home that, like, my parents kind of liked it. My dad likes like the Old West, that type of stuff. And I guess like my mom never really talked much about history, but it started with my interest in geography when I was little, and then in the presidents. Like, I used to memorize the presidents in order. I was one of those dorky kids in elementary school. And
yeah.
And also I just stared at maps. I love maps. And
sure.
And then, like the movie Forrest Gump had a big impact. Surprisingly, like that was a gateway.
So how did that have an impact? How did that kind of nudge you towards history?
Well, it has all those historic moments in it. So, right?
Yeah, so tell us about that.
I literally I turned to my parents and I would ask them, I was like, this stuff really happened? Like, all those people got shot? Like, it just blew my mind.
Interesting.
That a lot of that stuff was true. And they're like, well, Forrest Gump wasn't real, but
sure.
That other stuff. And then, so that was probably middle school. And then I had a really good 7th grade social studies teacher. Shout out to Mr. Emmett.
Oh,
all right.
But
that's awesome.
Honestly, though, but by the time I got to high school, my high school teachers weren't as passionate about history.
Okay.
And it kind of turned me off a little bit. They were kind of just there to coach,
Yeah.
There's a lot of teachers out there, unfortunately, that are just there to coach.
Sure.
But my mom said I should be a social studies teacher. And because of that kind of bad experience in high school, I was like, why would I want to go back to high school?
Yeah.
And so I ended up going into journalism.
Oh, okay.
So I was in TV and radio for a while. My first degree is in journalism.
Oh, interesting.
At the University of Kansas.
Cool.
I'm from Kansas.
Okay.
Raised just outside of Wichita, which is south central part of the state.
We've been there.
And
To Wichita.
nice, you have?
We've been
Actually?
to Wichita. We went to a wedding in Wichita.
Yeah.
We had a friend get married there.
Mm-hmm.
I started in broadcasting. I loved radio, but that's about the time in the early aughts that radio was kind of becoming automated.
Yeah.
And so it was all computers that was playing. Like, people thought that, DJ is still, the era of the DJ was over.
Yep.
And so I kind of had like a quarter life crisis in my mid 20s, and I went back to school and I became, all right, that's when I was like, you know what, maybe my mom was right. And I got a degree in education, and I taught in the classroom at grade 7 all the way up to seniors.
Wow.
For 12 years I taught. While I was teaching, I got a master's degree in history. But this whole time I was teaching, which I began teaching in 2009.
Okay.
You mentioned earlier my channel started in 2009.
That's right.
Well, the reason why I started the channel in 2009 was not because I wanted to be a YouTube star. I uploaded a private video for my actual students. Like no one else was ever meant to see the video.
Sure.
And so it was about the Compromise of 1850, and I was just being silly with my brother, and I forced Mrs. Beat to film, and I still forced her to help me out with the channel. And it was really bad and goofy. I showed it to my kids and didn't really think much of it. And then one day I just randomly decided to make it public, but then I noticed that I came back to check on it maybe a year or so later, and I was like, it had like thousands of views. And I realized that it's like, of course, because what's happening is teachers from all over the country, maybe even the world, are searching for this kind of somewhat obscure topic, the Compromise of 1850. And they're trying to find something more engaging to teach the students with. Yeah. And so I was like, that was really when a light bulb went off, and I was like, well, maybe I should make more of these. And then also for my students anyway, because they're fun. It's like combining my love for social studies and my journalism background.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I published other ones. And then from there, it just kind of grew slowly. But I didn't make any of my videos public, or like I didn't like kind of try to take it more seriously until at least 2013. That's when I was like, maybe I should try to. And that's when I realized you could also make money from it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which in 2013 it was chump change. It was, cents at that point. But about 2016 is when I realized it would be a side hustle where I could quit coaching. And I was coaching tennis and basketball.
Okay.
And I was like, yeah, fine. This could be my side hustle for the rest of my career. I could teach because I love teaching. And I could just do this on the side and make these videos, because I had a series that I covered every single presidential election in American history. And that it was the first time I had people that were just watching my videos for fun, meaning it wasn't a teacher that assigned my video to watch it to meet. So that was another big moment. And then actually last year, the channel has grown so big that I now do this full time.
Oh, wow.
So I quit the classroom last year.
So you went full time last year. That's pretty incredible. And that speaks to one, I think you're part of it is longevity, right? You've been chipping away at it. And that's what people say all the time, especially when it comes to YouTube type stuff, is like, it's typically 99% of the time not an overnight success thing, right? You're the perfect case of that. Like, it's taken, over 10 years, right, to just do that. And obviously you weren't kind of going full bore at it as a side hustle for the first couple, but it's taken time. You've gotten better. You combined your skill and knowledge of kind of some journalism and history and things like that. So that's a really cool story of kind of how that came to be. So do you have any kind of desires to kind of take the channel, things you're planning on doing that are coming up in the next couple years, things that are floating around in your head?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always thinking of new ways to trick people into learning history. That's really what it's all about, because I'm a big fan of the channel Vsauce, which is a science channel. And actually, have you heard of the channel Vsauce?
Yes, you actually referred to him in one of your videos. I think he covered one of the eclipses. He covered one of the eclipses, and you talked about him in one of your videos, and I actually looked up who that was. And I've recognized his videos, but I don't think I actually knew the name. But yeah, so I've heard of it.
Yeah,
it's pretty big.
His real name is Michael Stevens, and he's also from Kansas. He went to the same high school. He went to a high school that I used to teach at, Blue Valley High School in Overland Park, Kansas, which is pretty crazy. But I had a chance to meet him, and he's just insanely successful. Like, I think he has like 15 million subscribers at this point. It's ridiculous. Wow. but it's science, and I'll never forget, like, combined with me just watching his stuff for years, but like the short talk I had with him, you know, you really got to follow your own curiosity, and you can worry about teaching them the important stuff after that. Yep. Because what drew me into history was, I mentioned Forrest Gump, but really a lot of the presidential stuff, the political history stuff is what got me into it. For many people, it is military history. That's the gateway. Oh, yeah. And then, you know, especially like Civil War or World War II.
World War II.
But then, we see that with the History Channel, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, like once you get in there, though, then you can like, well, hey, come over here too and check this out. Like, because I'll cover some pretty obscure stuff that's important, but again, it's not many folks know about it, and so that's so exciting to me to like have the opportunity to share obscure yet important history with viewers.
Yeah, and you can tell, honestly, Mr. Beat. I want to call you Mr. Beat because that's how I see you on TV. I feel like you're my teacher.
Call me whatever.
I can tell you have the journalism background just about the way you tell the story and the way you keep your listener engaged the whole time. Yeah. And your production value is really great too. So
yeah, well, it's been pretty fun. So I'm gonna venture on into the kind of next segment here. And Matt, one of the things that I like to do with my guests is just kind of broach a topic. And Jen and I will usually kind of toss around topic ideas, and I'll try to come up with something. But we like to do a word association game. And so the word association game, it may not seem historically oriented at first, but eventually it steers us towards a topic. And again, it's mostly just kind of a fun way to broach a topic because it lets us kind of hear what you're thinking, but then anybody that's listening or watching, they can kind of play along at the same time. All right. So I'm going to say a word. You say the first word or phrase that pops to mind, and then we'll steer kind of towards a topic. This one should be relatively easy. We'll see. We'll start off with the first ones. I try to make the first words less obvious. Okay. So if I was to say rock and roll, what would you think?
I would think of the blues. Like, I don't know, like, I always think about what kind of,
sure.
Or jazz, you know, like, I don't know. What about you? Or wait, is this both?
No, this is just for you right now. This is just for you right now. Jen will give us her take. So blues, jazz, what comes before it. All right. So if I was to say the Ed Sullivan Show, what would you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's the Beatles, that first American performance.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's actually probably one of the first things I think too. Okay. Now, if I was to say the U.S. Army, what would you think?
My dad.
Okay. All right.
He was in the Army.
Okay. Yeah, we'll circle back to that. Now, if I was to say Memphis, what would you think?
Well, blues again. Yeah. And barbecue.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And this last one, I think will steer you right towards the topic we're going to talk about. And if I was to say Graceland, what would you think about?
Oh, yeah. Elvis.
Memphis,
yeah.
There we go.
Actually, I wanted to say Elvis for the rock and roll, but then I was like, nah, I'm go broad.
That's that's what Jen did. Jen said Elvis for rock and roll.
Yeah, so usually he asks me these first, and he's like rock and roll, and I said Elvis, and he goes, "Oh my gosh, you went right to it." And I said, "Well, it's kind of been on my mind with the movie and stuff."
Yeah, so for those following, right? I started off with rock and roll, right? Elvis, right? Yes, he's kind of the king. The Ed Sullivan Show, obviously Elvis was on the Ed Sullivan Show. The U.S. Army, Elvis did get drafted and go in the Army for a couple years. Memphis, he lived in Memphis, and then Graceland, that was kind of his famous thing. So Matt, different people have very different memories of Elvis, either like when you first learned of Elvis, when you first heard of him, or kind of how you know Elvis now, or the music, or kind of the man, the myth, the legend. So what do you remember learning about Elvis, either when you were younger or something that stands out to you now?
The first thing that pops in my head, and you know, I was mostly raised, like I was mostly a kid in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And it was about his death, frankly.
Yeah.
Like, his later years and death, and like how he died on a toilet.
Yeah,
like that was like the joke, you know.
Yeah.
And that he was still alive and he was living in a trailer park
Oh my
outside
gosh.
Milwaukee.
Yeah.
Being a maniac.
All the National Enquirers. Elvis was always on the cover.
Yeah, he's still alive.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I didn't discover his music until I was older. But even then I wasn't. Like, I do appreciate the older artists much more now. I mean, that tends to happen when you get older.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, but just in general, though, like, I did not like to listen to anything that was released before the mid 1980s. I was like, that's too old for me.
Yes. So I'd say for me, right, when I think of Elvis and Elvis when I was younger, so some people know this about me, some people don't. So I was a gymnast all growing up, right, from when I was 5 years old all the way through college. I was not very good in college, but I stuck it out. But when I was younger, right, I was a kid of the late 80s, early 90s. You know, I might be just a couple years older than you. And we would do my gymnastics gym when I was younger, would go around and do performances at schools, like local elementary and middle schools, right? And one of the songs, I believe, was an Elvis song. And I think it was like Jailhouse Rock or something like that. And I remember that's what I remember. I might have been 8 years old, 9 years old or something like that. And here's, 9-year-old Scott Benny in his little like red t-shirt and like tights and stuff like that, doing gymnastic stuff. But that's what that's the first thing that I remember when I think of Elvis. And obviously later, some of the stuff that you talked about, he died on the toilet. And I actually got the chance to visit Graceland after I graduated college when I drove across country from Maryland out to California, visited there with my best friend from high school. And then Jen, I mean, she's got a lot bigger tie to Elvis and probably remembers a lot more.
Well, I mean, just my parents' wedding song was Elvis. So I always heard it from like a little kid. And I always knew I was born the year he died. Yeah. Right. So I'm like 77, right? So I always knew that I was alive when Elvis had passed, like barely alive. But I remember mostly about Elvis growing up is TNT used to play like movies during the day, like old movies, especially like during the summers. And if you would had sleepovers with your friends, and they would play a bunch of Elvis movies, like Blue Hawaii or Jailhouse Rock and stuff. And I remember watching them then.
Oh, interesting.
But honestly, we never appreciated Elvis or cared much for him until we moved to Memphis.
Yeah.
And it's like so much a part of the town that you can't hide from it. You've got to kind of learn about him and know who he is because he's so much of Memphis.
Yeah.
So. Yeah.
Have you had a chance to see the Elvis movie? I know it just came out just a little while ago. Or do you have any interest in movies like that?
No, I haven't. I do want to watch it. I'm a big sucker for music biopics.
Okay.
Oh, then you'll like it.
Genre.
You'll like, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm the same.
I haven't seen the James Brown one yet either.
I haven't either, to be honest with you, and I want to see that as well. James Brown one. Get on up.
I just remembered. Forrest Gump also referenced Elvis.
He does because he stays at his mom's boarding house, right?
That's right.
He stays at his mom's, and he's like, "Show me how you do that again." He has the braces on his legs,
so
he's moving kind of like shakily.
Yeah,
and he's like, "Do that again. Do that move again." Right?
Oh my gosh, I totally forgot about that.
So basically that he's mimicking Forrest Gump's movements. Like that's where he's getting that.
That's what they imply in the movie.
He was so like his mom was so horrified by
learning more about it. So we did a Talk with History podcast, and Jen kind of gave us kind of her historian's take on kind of some of the accuracies or, the liberties they took in the recent movie. And she, for the most part, it's pretty historically accurate. But like a lot of movies, they compress a lot of events.
Sure.
And he sang a song in 1950, whatever, that he didn't actually write until 1960 or something like that.
Yeah.
But learning more and more about him it's just so interesting about the cultural impact. And like Jen said, living in Memphis, we were out there for the 40th anniversary of his death. And Jen went out. So at Graceland, they have a whole Elvis week, right? And there's all sorts of events going on because it's a huge draw for people all over the world. And she went out there for the 40th anniversary.
So kind of like what you do, Mr. Beat, and you like stop people on the street and ask them like, what does this mean to you? What do you think about this? I went there. They shut down. Have you ever been to Graceland before?
No, I have not.
You have to come out. You have to come out. I'll take you personal
Yeah, I do.
They shut down. So the street in front of his house is a pretty busy street. It used to be a Route 51, and they made it Elvis Presley Boulevard. And they shut down the whole street. And people will stand out there and they make shrines, kind of like a tailgate, right? And they make these shrines to Elvis, and they put little movies up, and they sit in their lawn chairs all night long. Because he, basically his death is overnight, right? Because he goes to the bathroom and dies on the toilet. Like, it's kind of like an overnight thing. And I just asked a ton of people, why are you here? Where are you from? And what did Elvis mean to you? And so many people were not from America. So many people were from all over the world. And I mean, they had such a profound closeness to Elvis Presley. It was amazing to me, and what he meant to them and what he did in their lives. But then when it's not Elvis week, just living in Memphis, so many people we knew have personal Elvis stories. Like, my dad played football with him on the front lawn, or my mom went to prom with him one time, or my cousin was babysat by him. And so he was such, like I said, you can't live there without being immersed by him. He was Memphis. Like, he was really into being part of the community.
Now,
really
Matt, you said you were kind of a sucker for some musical biopics. What are some of your favorites as far as those go?
I really liked the Johnny Cash one.
Oh yeah,
another Memphis
what was the name
one.
of that one?
That's why you have to come to Memphis.
Walk the Line.
Yeah.
Walk the Line.
Walk the Line. Yeah, like it was really powerful, especially when they showed the scene, they dramatized him auditioning, and he sounded so different. That's what. Like, I'm a musician myself, and actually one of my other YouTube channels is music history. I focus a lot on music history, and I have not done Johnny Cash or Elvis yet. However, you describing Graceland and the fans of Elvis, like that reminded me so much of Prince.
Yeah.
Like
it's
quickly happening up in Minneapolis, Paisley Park that was Prince's studio, and it's turned into what Graceland is in many ways.
Sure.
It's now a museum,
and
his fans, it's a pilgrimage all the time to visit there, and a lot of his fans are just as dedicated, which you don't think of him being as big as Elvis, but maybe someday.
Yeah.
Give it time. It's comparable. Plus, like, you don't have that with certain other, like, you don't have that with Michael Jackson, because with Michael Jackson, there's no one place
that
you can just. Like, he kind of lived all over. He had different. I mean, he did have that the
Neverland Ranch. If
they
open
California.
Neverland Ranch up to the public, maybe.
Yeah, but that makes a difference when there's a place.
Yes. Yes.
Sorry to kind of go off.
No,
no.
That makes you have to come to Memphis then, because take you to Sun Studio where Johnny Cash recorded, and you can go to his apartment where he lived, in the beginning of his life and stuff. And,
did you ever get a chance to see Bohemian Rhapsody?
Oh yeah, I was going to mention that one as well. That's I did make a video about Queen.
Yeah.
In fact, my one of my best friends growing up loved Queen, played them all the time. Back then, I was like, classic rock. Look at their hair, they're crazy. But then when I was older, I was like, holy crap, they're geniuses.
They're amazing.
Yeah, it's a great movie too. Yeah, people do, like you were referencing about the Elvis movie, like, oh, well, it's not completely historically accurate. Well, who cares? They have to do that to make it a good story that's digestible.
Yeah, exactly. And you have to show conflict and an arc. And
I mean, I got raised a little bit on actually like musicals, right? So one of my favorite kind of, I wouldn't really call it a music biopic because it's a story, right? It's completely made up, but it's Seven Brides for Seven Brothers.
He loves that movie.
If you've never seen it, it's old school musical, right? So it's right up there with like Oklahoma and those kinds of movies and stuff like that. But it's such a fun movie. And it's like classically, like, there's no way they could say the things today that they said in those movies back then. That's the kind of stuff that just like makes you smile. And then again, me as a gymnast, right? They have a lot of the dancing, and then they actually have some like some of the actors and actresses that have like gymnastics background. So again, that was my household. My mom, if she was going to force a movie upon us, it was typically a musical. So I'm similar to you. I love those music biopics. Like I love the Elton John Rocket Man, even though that was a little bit different. A little more theatrical. I really enjoyed that. So that's pretty fun. So one of the next questions I like to ask our guests, Matt, and this is more, more about you than it really is about history, but what's the first big like historical event that you remember happening in your lifetime, whether it's personal, we've had guests kind of give personal family examples, or something that's like local to the Kansas, Wichita area, or even international, global international event. A lot of people say the Challenger. What's the first big historical event that you remember either as a youth or that kind of stands out earlier in life?
Yeah, that question is, I think, different for younger folks because they think they remember stuff that they actually don't. Like they only think they remember it because they saw it later.
Sure.
And I think that's even with like, I'm just a few years younger. I was born in 81, so I don't remember the Challenger. I'd be lying to say, but other people my age say, "Oh, I remember it. I remember exactly." Like, no, you don't.
Yeah.
So for me, I think it was the Berlin Wall coming down. I'll never forget watching that on the news and being really confused and asking my parents, what are they doing? Like, why are they like destroying this wall and going crazy? And should we be worried? And they tried to explain it to me, but I was like 8 or something.
That's interesting because actually JD from History Underground said, I think he said the Berlin Wall as well.
He remembered the Hoff singing.
Really?
He said he remembered David Hasselhoff with like his jacket, like his light up jacket and everything like that.
I don't remember.
Do you remember do you remember seeing it on TV? Is that kind of how you saw it, and that's what prompted you to kind of ask your parents about it?
I think it was just it was like Peter Jennings or something.
Sure.
The boring news. That was it. Nothing. Yeah. No Hasselhoff for me. But, so it does stand out.
Yeah. So what about that? Do you think kind of made that kind of like almost like a light bulb moment, right? You identified that pretty quickly, so that obviously that stood out. So what about that? Is it kind of something like this is the first kind of pull back the curtain type moment? Yeah,
because when you're 7 years old, my daughter just turned 8, and she's just now curious about what's outside of her town, where we live. It's like, and I think part of that's because we just went to California, so she's like asking all these questions. But like, you're in your little bubble.
Yeah.
And you just assume that your world is just a very small one. And you hear about this crazy stuff happening on the other side of the world, and it kind of like, I guess, shifts your reality. So that's why you remember it.
Yeah, and that's why I'm always curious to hear what people's kind of first, historic memory is. And obviously there's some similar. Yeah, well, and there's always some similarities based on age, not always. And actually, Jared from Real History had some really interesting answers.
Yeah, he was very young. He was very aware. Very young. I told him, like, you're pretty smart to be that aware at that age. He was like 3 or something. I wasn't either.
I was
like
sheltered.
I was very like just floating through life.
Yeah. So well, and it's interesting to kind of to your point, right? So I was born just a year after you. I was May of 82 for me. So you and I are almost the same age. And I actually didn't have broadcast television where I lived in Central California because we lived in a valley. So you want to talk about sheltered? Like I didn't even know that television was free until I was like in high school.
Whoa!
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. Not the norm. Even the 80s and 90s, right? It's very. I actually read a lot.
We graduated the same year, I assume.
Yeah. So, but to me, my first historic event was something that actually happened to me. And then I kind of remember, I think to your point, I probably remember later seeing news clips about it and kind of tying those things together. But I remember it because there was an earthquake, right? In California, there's earthquakes all the time. But this is a pretty big one. It was actually in 89, so I would have been 7. And this one was big enough to actually, topple homes over, not where I was living, but in the Los Angeles and the San Francisco area. And I actually remember kids, like having a new kid show up in my class one day because their home was completely ruined by this earthquake and their family had to move. And so to me, it was a personal thing because we didn't really have the news in my house and stuff like that. But to your point,
makes sense.
To your point, right? Is I was about 7 or 8 years old, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, there's stuff that happens outside of my tiny little bubble right here. That's my world. So actually Chris Witt from Witt Doc Cemetery Tours, we did just an audio one with him, and he remembered the earthquake because of the World Series as well. So that's funny. So she's the only one so far on this podcast that doesn't remember that.
I'm older too. So I was probably like 10.
Do you remember the Berlin Wall?
We're Xenials here.
Yes.
77 to 83. It's a very special.
It is.
There's something weird about our age.
I know.
If you're born between 77 and 83, my wife's 83.
Yeah.
Like you don't quite fit into millennials or Gen X, do you? Yeah.
I feel like you got the best of both.
That's what I say.
You can kind of grab both.
We understand or not afraid of technology, but we have like the good solid work ethic of the Gen Xers. Yeah. I guess that's what we like to say. Yeah. I'm just making that up for myself.
I think Gen Z actually gets a bad rap because I had Gen Z students and some of them like amazed me, like their work ethic was just insane. I'm like, I wasn't like that when I was in high school.
That's
you true. Have 2 jobs outside of school. Like, what the heck?
Well, I went to grad school later, and I remember one of the people in our class, like, all you millennials. And I was like, no, not me. I'm like, I'm Gen X. Don't be calling me.
Yeah.
I didn't want to be associated. No, I'm not a millennial.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, people get so stereotyped, right? But each generation you still have people who are strong and resilient and have good work ethics, no matter what background you come from. So
yeah, no, it's super interesting. And then kind of from that, where I like to kind of veer our questions towards is regional history. So I like to ask because we get to do these podcasts with people that are kind of all over the place, right? So a couple of days ago, someone in Pennsylvania. We've talked to folks in Kentucky, friends that are down in Florida. You're in Kansas. So what's a bit of regional history that folks in your area would know pretty well? And if I was to come visit Wichita or the greater Wichita area, I'd be like, yeah, I've never heard of that before, or I didn't realize that happened there. So what's a bit of regional history that might stand out to you that you knew since you were growing up and someone coming into town and be like, yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean, well, now I live in Lawrence. So you probably are both very familiar with the history of my town because it was kind of the epicenter of bleeding Kansas right before the Civil War. Yeah. So maybe my better example is Wichita, which I just always knew that it was Cowtown. Like we used to go there on field trips every year. Like near downtown Wichita, they've preserved buildings, and it was a cattle town. Like they would bring the cattle up to Wichita from Texas through, at the time it was called Indian Territory. And the reason why they did that was because the railroads went through Wichita. So Wichita was one of the main places where the cows went to on the railroads, and then a lot of the railroads sent them to Kansas City, St. Louis, Chicago to get slaughtered and ate.
Oh, interesting.
The rest of the country. Yeah. So it was that was a big part of the history. And I mean, really, when we think about a lot of the cow towns, like in movies, I guess, like Dodge City is kind of the more famous one.
Sure.
We think about the violence associated with it. And that was true. But I think Wichita was more low key. It's just kind of like an ordinary town, but it would have been very stinky. Like probably the worst smell ever.
Yeah.
If you were to be in Wichita in 1870s.
That's very true.
Yeah, that would probably keep some of those bandits and the lawmen. They would just kind of keep on moving west, or just kind of stay on the train and keep rolling through if it was going to be that smelly. So how about the where you're at now? Now, I joke with Jen, and you don't know this about me, but I'm not actually myself a huge history buff, right? I married the history nerd in this family, and so when you talk about Bleeding Kansas, if someone's listening to this, like give us a little bit of that and kind of where you're at, or what folks might not know about your area that was the genesis of that.
Well, is it okay if I ask Jen what she can share first, and then I can kind of bounce off that?
So what I think of is so you have slave states, and you have states who did not have slavery, and you have more states who want to come into the Union. So what's happening is that it's Kansas, right? They can't decide, right, whether to make it a slave state or a free state.
Okay,
and
because Stephen Douglas,
blame
him, Kansas-Nebraska Act.
Yes, he goes up. He's actually the one who goes up against Abraham Lincoln, right? Am I correct here? Am I thinking?
Yeah.
And so, so you have both sides that are really digging in their heels here, because you're going to. Wasn't like an even number. There was an even number of enslaved states and an even number of not slave states. So this was going to set it over one way or the other.
Tiebreaker.
Yes, and when it comes to voting,
okay,
when it comes to representation.
I tell people all the time, I'm very good at, like, once you say that and be like, oh yeah, that sounds familiar. That's what I'm good at for history.
This is where you have the epicenter of arguments and fighting, and this is it's 1850, so you're still like 10 years out of the Civil War, but these are the precursors to it. So
Matt, a lot of times with the regional stuff, sometimes locals, right, like yourself, will have either a slightly different take, right? Like as you live in the South, like we've lived in the South, sometimes people down in the South have a little bit different take on different parts of history. Is there something for locals there? They either
I'm trying to remember, like
typically say like, oh yeah, everybody knows this, but we know it's that type thing. Is there a little bit different take for locals on?
Yeah, I have a video on this. It's why Kansas and Missouri hate each other.
Okay.
And so Lawrence was the first major town that was established by the Free Staters, as they were known, because after the Kansas-Nebraska Act was passed in 1854, they kind of said the heck with the balance thing. They just said, hey, popular sovereignty. So you just move out there and you guys can all vote on it once you're out there. And so I think it's one of the worst laws in American history because it led to all this, not just fighting, terrorism, essentially.
Wow.
And so you had, but Lawrence was known as the Free State. Like they wanted to make Kansas a free state.
Mm-hmm.
And then you had Lecompton nearby, which still exists. It was a town started by, we call them bushwhackers, and Free Staters were called Jayhawkers, which is what the mascot for the University of Kansas State is the Jayhawk.
That's neat.
Yeah. So the bushwhackers were in Lecompton, and they had their own constitution. And then there was Topeka was another Free State Jayhawker town. They had the Topeka Constitution. There was like three different constitutions competing for us to become a state by 1856. That same year, 1856, the town I live in, Lawrence, was burned to the ground by pro-slavery Missourians.
Wow.
And so it went back and forth, and it was literally called the border war, back and forth because these bushwhackers would cross the border from Missouri. They would illegally vote in elections, and then they would kill people, burn buildings down, and then they'd go back to Missouri at night. And so that's why John Brown came out here, and he joined the Free State side. And like a lot of people call him a terrorist as well. He would do the same thing, and Jayhawkers went to the Missouri side. They burnt down Osceola. Jeez. And that led to the second time my town was burned down to the ground in 1863 during the Civil War. It was known as Quantrill's Raid. Mm-hmm. And you can go downtown and you see it's completely rebuilt. There's one building in particular that was rebuilt twice, the Eldridge Hotel.
Holy cow.
But everything else was gone. And so, yeah, like if you, even to this day, like we hate Missourians. Like it goes back to those slave holding Missourians. And I mean, the high school that is nearest to me is called Free State High School. My favorite brewery in town is called Free State Brewery.
Gotcha.
Oh, wow.
So you see it.
A lot of historic names.
And see, that's the kind of stuff that I find interesting because, again, right, I kind of remind folks who are listening to this podcast that, I'm learning history not like you guys learn history. I'm learning history from Jen, from you, as I'm kind of producing this stuff, right? And Jen's the historian. Jen went and got her graduate degree in American history, and she did all that stuff, and she loves doing all this. And then us doing the channel and the podcast together, like I'm learning all this stuff more. So it's been really fun for me to kind of do this with Jen, with guests like you, Matt, and discovering some of this stuff. So I always appreciate you guys who are much smarter in the history world, breaking it down crayon style, like I like to say, for someone like me. And potentially our listeners who maybe they didn't know where the Jayhawks, got their name, things like that.
And I love that about your videos, Mr. Beat. I would say Mr. Beat still, but I love that about your videos because you're asking like what people feel and know about history, not really what might be accurate, but what do they know and think about this, or what do they see when they see this, or what have they been taught about this? Because that's one of the things like what we talk about a lot, and what we why we do talk with history is because I really just want you to have some of the facts and not really get into what I think about those facts, but just what are the facts? Like you can decide for yourself, but most people don't even know what the facts are. People are just told what to think about something, but not where does that come from? What's the foundation of that? So I try to get there for people, and that's kind of harder to do because you're always working against, bias. Personal
bias or anything like that, and that's been the fun thing for us too. And honestly, just for us as a family, it gives us an excuse to drag our kids out of the house and go somewhere and talk about a historic location or something like that. So
that's very cool.
That's what I love about what you are doing is you're going to the historical locations, and I've been trying to do more and more of that.
Yeah,
get out of my basement,
Sure.
And it's not easy. Yeah, like I'm planning on doing a big video about the Oregon Trail, actually, and I'm dragging my whole family with me.
Oh, cool.
Drive the entire Oregon Trail.
Are you going to go to Fort Laramie? Because I grew up in Cheyenne, Wyoming.
We are going to go there, yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
That's awesome. Yeah, Wyoming. Okay, so, and then, what you were hinting at, Jen, with like, you got to meet people where they are. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, their eyes are going to glaze over. Yeah. So my way of doing this is we're driving there. We're driving the Oregon Trail in a Tesla.
Oh, wow.
So, and the reason it's a gimmicky thing. I get it, but cool. People will click on that video, and once they click, they realize, oh, you know what? There's parallels here because in Wyoming, there's not many charging stations. No. Yeah. So it will be quite an adventure at times.
It will be.
So we're going to see how it goes. That's in August, and I think, they're a little nervous. My family's a little nervous, but I'm actually forcing them all to film. My daughters
it'll be great
11 and 8, so they're already YouTubers, so they can handle it.
Yeah. Right on.
No, it'll be so. That's like when you talk about regional history. Growing up in Cheyenne, we would go to the Oregon Trail ruts. Like that's what we would do for our field trips, right? We go to Fort Laramie, we go to the Oregon Trail ruts. We'd see them in the mountains where we'd go to Register Cliff. That whole homesteading story was our, the story. American Indians, reservations are still in Wyoming, right? So all of that history is very what I would learn. That's my regional history. But you'll love it. They will definitely be charging stations in Jackson, Wyoming. Don't worry. Go where the money is.
Oh,
yeah. Jackson for sure. Be curious at Cheyenne. Cheyenne's a little bit smaller.
Yeah, probably not Cheyenne. Maybe not even Casper, but Jackson for sure.
I've already mapped out an itinerary, and
there you go.
It's going to be a little tricky, but I think I can pull it. I have to go off the Oregon Trail a little bit sometimes. But
yeah.
That's awesome, though.
Yeah. Well, Matt, it's been a pleasure, chatting with you and kind of learning about how your channel started and some of your personal history experiences and regional history. Thank you for educating me on Bleeding Kansas and Lawrence and Wichita and how the Jayhawks got their name. That's super fun, right? Again, I'm always learning, and I'm learning to how fun history can be when you kind of discover these little nuggets. So Matt, if our listeners wanted to look you up, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, I would say Google my name, Mr. Beat, but if you do that, what pops up is Mr. Beast, who is a much bigger YouTuber than me.
Yep.
So they'll say, "Did you mean Mr. Beast?" And you'll say, "No, I meant Mr. Beat." So, and eventually you should find me. I'm on pretty much all the the websites out there.
Sure.
Even TikTok.
Wow.
So, you guys do TikTok?
You know what? I tried TikTok for a little bit.
You should start.
Yeah, so I did about 300 days. I tried to do one short YouTube short video a day I tried to do it for an entire year. I made it about almost 10.
Gosh.
Yeah. So
I was very motivated.
So I was super motivated. I got about 300 videos, right? And just they're like 20 second, 12 second. It was a daily fact, right? Hey, on this day, this happened, right? And it was very short. So I would kind of do all this batch fact finding, put it all together, literally just kind of read it, throw some pictures or video over it. Did that for about 300 days. And I kind of had to, I was like, okay, I'm good. I was going for a year. I made it 10 months and I was like, you know what? I'm good. This is like, there's no trophy at the end of the 1 year.
Got burnt out.
He did.
Yeah. But every now and then one of those little shorts will just kind of take off and get like a couple thousand views. It's pretty random. So maybe I'll try to repurpose those on TikTok. But so I tried TikTok for a little bit. It wasn't really doing it. So I just decided to focus on one. And I think I cross-posted from there as well as on Instagram.
Yeah. How do you do all of them? Do you kind of link them all together?
I post the same exact video to shorts as I do as TikTok. And
yeah.
They always do better on YouTube Shorts. Probably I already have an established audience on there, so that makes sense. But yeah, no, I mean,
you never know.
You got to keep looking for new ways to
younger generation.
Actually, there's this shout out to this. There's this Kansas teacher who's they're what they're doing. Every single county in Kansas, they're looking up how that county got named, which
that's
I think
cool.
is a genius idea.
That's a great idea.
Can't remember the name. I was going to give him a shout out, but you might be able to find it on TikTok. So stuff like that. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I thought the daily facts thing would have had a little bit more traction. And I was like, man, I was in month 8, month 9. I was like, man, this just isn't taking off. I had a couple that would pick up some traction. I had one that got maybe 80 to 100 that close. It's creeping up on 80 or 90,000, like one of my shorts out of 300. So I was like, that juice might not be worth the squeeze. So I backed off a little bit.
Jeez.
So, but it was fun. And I still dabble with the shorts every now and then, but I kind of just had to kind of pull back for a little bit. And we wanted to do the podcast a little bit more because Jen and I actually just really enjoy doing this. And then
it's something we can do together.
Gives us an excuse to reach out to folks like you. And thank you again to your wife for inviting me into the Slack.
She was so
she was
nice
great
and helpful. And she's the one who reached out and communicated first. So thank her for that.
Oh, sure. Yeah. We all find each other as history tubers.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, glad you joined up.
Yeah, thank you again. So for those listening, you guys can look up Mr. Beat. That is the history. It's not Mr. Beast. You did not mean Mr. Beast. It's Mr. Beat on YouTube. You can find him. He's got a whole lot of videos. They're great. We highly recommend it. Thank you for listening to the Talk with History podcast. And please reach out to us at our website, talkwithhistory.com. But more importantly, if you know someone else that might enjoy this podcast, please share this with them, especially if you think that today's topic would interest a friend. Shoot them a text and tell them to look up the Talk with History podcast because we rely on you, our community, to grow, and we appreciate you all every day. We'll talk to you next time.
Thank you.